Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, please subscribe. I'd really love that. If you're returning, how are you today? In today's video, we're going to be continuing with We Had Everything But Money, okay? One of my daughters had just finished buying the week's groceries for a family of 4. The bill was considerably more than $100. How in the world did people eat during the Depression when there was no money, she asked. Truth to tell, we ate pretty well. Just read the memories in this chapter. We ate things like kings, recalls Juanita Urbach of Brush, Colorado. Not everyone did, to be sure. Years after the Depression, some people would confess that they were driven to such desperation that they actually stole food and had a guilty conscience for the rest of their lives. Others, like hobos, resorted to begging. Usually it was a simple request for a sandwich or a few potatoes and carrots that would be added to a big community pot that was always cooking at the hobo jungle down near the railroad tracks. To eat, you had to contribute, no matter how little. Those were also the days when you could charge your groceries. Chances are that the owner of the corner grocery was your neighbor, not someone working for a giant corporation in a big city skyscraper and thousands miles away. So you can run a tab and paid what you could when you could, and he understood. Food was simpler in those days and therefore cheaper. What we buy today is food that's already been peeled or shucked or chopped up and then seasoned and cooked and boxed or canned or frozen. In short, we paid others to do most of the hard work that once was done in the home. Sunday night supper was often bread and milk, or crackers and milk, or leftover popcorn and milk, not fancy, but tasty, cheap, and filling. Parents learned tricks that cut the food bill. You parked outside the grocery until 10 minutes before closing time on Saturday night, and then hurried in to snap up bargains on fresh produce. It was priced for quick sale because it wouldn't keep over Sunday in those unrefrigerated times. I remember Dad buying an entire grocery sack full of bananas for 10 cents. We feasted on them for nearly a week. During the summer, I was dispatched at dawn on my bicycle to scout country roads for wild asparagus. After a while, you knew where it grew, so in half hour you could collect enough for a couple of meals. In the fall, the whole family went with gunny sacks to a heavily wooded county park that had dozens of walnut and hickory trees. In a few hours, we had enough nuts to last us until the next autumn. Most people had gardens, big gardens. They not only provided vegetables and berries and a rhubarb for the summer months, but also the raw material for canning, which Ron Stauder of Belleville, Illinois, describes so well in his chapter. This measure of a dedicated homemaker was how many of hundreds of jars of vegetables, fruit, and jelly she put up for the winter. No social visit was complete without a trip to the basement to admire shelf after shelf of mason jars filled with string beans and corn, red beets, and tomatoes. There were other tricks in our family. We still make depression syrup. The process is a simple matter of cooking down a mixture of white or brown sugar plus water and perhaps some maple flavoring. It's not Caro syrup, of course, but tasty, warm, and cheap. People who lived on farms had a big advantage, and in the 30s, 20% of all Americans did live on farms. You had cows that gave milk and chickens that laid eggs, or else were the featured attraction at Sunday dinner. Your orchard produced apples and cherries and plums and pears. You planted long rows of sweet corn out in the fields. Every farmer in our area knew that the man who tested milk for butter fat at the milk depot didn't work on Sunday. So on Sunday mornings before the milkman drove in to pick up our milk cans, you skimmed off the cream. Once you've tasted ice cream made from pure cream, you're spoiled for life. In 1934, when I was a boy of 12, my mom and dad and I moved in with my grandma in southern Illinois town of Albion. The Depression was in full swing in that little town, and jobs were as scarce as diamonds in a coal mine. Dad was between jobs, and we had to go on government relief until we got back on our feet. We had never had any luxuries like electricity, a furnace, air conditioning, or even an electric fan. I did my homework at night by the light of the kerosene lamp. Dad used to joke that we were so poor the flies had to carry a lunch when we came into our house. But we had a big pot-bellied stove to keep us warm, plenty of homemade quilts to snuggle under at night, and lots of good, wholesome food to eat. My step-grandfather raised tobacco and had a big garden with several fruit trees. It was my job to pick the fruit and vegetables, and Mom and Grandma slaved over a hot stove all summer to can them and make jams and jellies for the coming winter. I especially remember the huge platters of fried bread that Grandma made for supper every night, along with an ever-present pot of great northern beans and a number 10 cast-iron skillet filled with fried potatoes. I always finished off my meal with a peanut butter mixed with either half a pint of blackberry jam, peach preserves, or sorghum molasses. We ate a lot of inexpensive meat then. A steak probably would have made us sick. We had a lot of jowl meat, salt pork, and liver, cuts of meat that better-offs didn't want, and we were glad to get it. On rare occasions, we had what Dad called Hoover ham, or bologna, along with cheddar cheese and crackers. When President Roosevelt started the WPA, Dad was lucky enough to get a job for $1 a day running the wooden end of a long-handled shovel used to grade ditch banks. After that, we were able to rent a house of our own, but those earlier recollections will have a special place in my mind forever. Oh yes, I recall the Great Depression. I was a teenager then, and the way I remember it, it was more of a challenge than a depression. Mom dug up our front yard to plant a garden, and it was really thrived. Some of our neighbors did the same thing, so vegetable swapping was a common occurrence. Sometimes we get a nice surprise through the neighborhood exchange like corn on the cob. One afternoon, I asked Mom what we were having for dinner that evening. She grinned and said, "I don't know. Let's wait and see what the neighbors bring in." People helped each other then, just as they still do when the chips are down. That's the American way. Michelle Beffa, Carpinteria, California. That's the American way. When my sisters and I think of the Depression and how we got through it, I'm sure all three of us immediately think of pancakes. Pancakes could be made even when it seemed we had no food in the house. All we really needed was flour. The rest of the ingredients are subject to alteration, as we quickly learned. For instance, I learned that a tablespoon of cornstarch could be substituted for 1 egg in any recipe that called for more than 1 egg. You still need that first egg, though. I also learned how to make an acceptable maple syrup substitute with a small bottle of maple flavoring, sugar, and a little bit of water. Janice Nelson, Redwood City, California. Whenever I'm in my kitchen smelling the aroma of beans slowly cooking for our evening meal, my mind goes back to my childhood, when this food was vital to our survival. We may not have had many material things, but we never went hungry, thanks to beans and cornbread. This simple meal reminds me that the essentials of life need not be extravagant. We often think that to be happy, we need bigger and better things, and yet When I was growing up, there was so much love in our family that we just didn't think about needing anything more. I had never forgotten that period of my life or that Depression era meal. It remains one of my favorites, and I still enjoy cooking up a pot full of the past of Netta Whitlock, Altus, Oklahoma. Long before street vendors or lunch wagons started making the rounds at offices and construction sites, my mother invented and operated her own lunch truck. We were living in a rural area near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, when a WPA project began on our road. She seized the opportunity by providing sandwiches, hot coffee, and cold lemonade to the crew right on the work site. My brothers and I were Mom's crew. We'd go to the site in the morning and collect the workers' orders, then take them back home to Mom. When the orders were filled, we'd deliver them to the little truck we'd made with the wheels from a red wagon. The prices were 10 cents for a spiced ham sandwich, 5 cents for a fried egg sandwich, 10 cents for a pint jar of coffee, and 5 cents for a pint jar of lemonade. We kept a charge book and collected our money when the men were paid on Fridays. Jean McFeely, Marion Station, Pennsylvania. One of my favorite winter memories is of making ice cream. Yes, I did say winter. We'd scoop some of the rich cream from the top of Grandpa's milk cans to make our chilly treat. When it was done, we would open the oven door on the old home comfort stove, prop our feet up on it to keep warm, and enjoy that homemade ice cream. For another wintertime treat, we'd scoop up clean snow and pack it in pie tins while Grandma boiled down the pint of maple syrup to the point where it would pour in a sticky, thread-thin steam. We'd slowly trickle this sweet topping over the tins of snow. Boy, did it make a great candy. During summer, we'd carry a quart of home-canned beef, a loaf of homemade bread, and a basket full of onions, tomatoes, and cucumbers from the garden down to the creek. Grandma would pile stones in a circle and build a fire, while the kids stripped down to our underduddies for a swim. Grandma would cook the beef and onions in her old black cast iron frying pan. How wonderful they smelled as they simmered over the fire. The whole meal was delicious, especially after a refreshing swim. Maybe it was because I was so young, but the Depression era seemed to me to be a loving, beautiful time. Everyone needed and respected each other. It might not be such a tragic thing to have to go back to some time after that way of life. Leela Mole, Allegan, Michigan. We often made a meal of sliced raw potatoes, onion, and on occasion a few strips of bacon. We added some water and cooked everything together in a covered pot. It was really good. In fact, we still make depression soup today. Grace McAdam, Whitehall, Pennsylvania. In my hobo days, during the late 1930s, I ate an awful lot of bean sandwiches. You first had to acquire by some honest method of loaf of bread and a can of pork and beans. In those days, either cost about 10 cents. Then you took out your trusty pocket knife, cut the bread in half, hollowed out a part of the inside of the loaf, and filled the hole with beans. This sandwich was eaten from the outside in and no utensils were required. Hobo stew was another favorite. The list of ingredients could be endless because anything that was edible went into this pot. Hobos commonly congregated in camps or jungles at the edge of town. Each man in the camp contributed something to the stew pot. Whatever could be scrounged from a store, garden, or farmer's field across the tracks was fair game. Meat was the toughest ingredient to come by. The best we could usually contribute was fish, crawdad tails, squirrels, and rabbits. Once in a while, a hapless chicken would be hit by a train or a flying rock, and it would find its way to the stew pot, too. Finding water for soup was never a problem, as most hobo jungles were on a creek bank, under a bridge, or a trestle. No one worried that cows or livestock were wading and drinking in the same stream. We hadn't heard much about pollution then, and wouldn't have cared even if we did. Biscuits and bread, after a fashion, could be made with a little flour, salt, and water. The dough was twisted on a stick and baked over a fire. It didn't taste like much, but it was filling. It's been 55 years since I ate those meals, and I've suffered no ill effects. James D. Moore III, Olympia, Washington. My parents had just adopted me when the banks closed, so my father was caught with about $2 in his pocket. His brother owed him $10, which he collected right away. My parents then went to the store and bought a leg of lamb. We had lamb for a couple of meals, and then Mama made a lamb stew out of the leftovers. We ate that, and ate that, and ate that. At each meal, Mama would throw in more potatoes and carrots and serve it one more time. Of course, each time the dish had less and less lamb in it, but it lasted until the bag reopened. After that, my father swore he would never eat lamb again, and he never did. Marie Shull, Strasburg, Virginia. There were 6 children in our family, and during the Depression, our father worked at whatever job he could find. In 1938, he got a job building roads with the WPA in Maine. He was paid $1 a day, but that wasn't enough for a family of 8 to live on. My mother helped where she could, cutting potato seed for a local farmer, hanging wallpaper for those who were more fortunate, and taking in a little ironing. When the towns began distributing government food for needy families, we received split peas, dried beans, canned milk, rolled oats, flour, lard, butter, and sometimes oranges or smoked ham. When we got ham, we carefully rationed it out, 1 slice per person to make it last as long as possible. Our breakfasts usually consisted of oatmeal or pancakes with molasses. For other meals, we ate pea soup, baked or stewed beans, corn chowder, tomato bisque, macaroni with stewed tomatoes, fried salt pork with brown gravy and potatoes, and poor man's soup. Salt pork with potatoes, onions, and milk. We ate biscuits with every meal. We got by on just the bare necessities back then, but we had each other and lots of love. Those days made a survivor out of me. Lorraine Lane, Brookfield, Massachusetts. I found this account in a book of how one woman fed her family of 8 for $1 a day in 1934. I wonder how many folks today would be satisfied with such a menu. Day 1, macaroni with tomato sauce and apples. Day 2, mutton stew with potatoes and cookies. Day 3, broiled fish with cream sauce, bread, and an orange. Day 4, warmed over fish with toast, baked sweet potatoes and prunes. Day 5, hard-boiled eggs scalloped with rice, cabbage, and gingerbread. Day 6, beef hash, string beans, apple pie. Day 7, thick soup, biscuits, mixed fruit. Day 8, vegetable salad, baked potato, apricot. Day 9, codfish cakes, cauliflower, watermelon. Day 10, Spanish rice with liver sauce, brown muffins, gelatin. Day 11, potato Suzette, lettuce, baked pears. Day 10, beef pie, squash, plums. Day 13, hot boiled potatoes with butter and milk, jam, and crackers. Day 14, baked beans, brown bread, bananas. Day 15, tomatoes, eggs, potato salad, cornbread, hotcakes. Ethelene Nelson, Canaan, Maine. Wow. It's very interesting, isn't it? Our eating habits in the 1930s were regulated by the seasons. The grocery bill always had to be kept to a minimum because our only reliable source of income came from selling eggs and cream. We welcomed spring each year. It was a time of hope. We searched the fence corners for lamb quarters and added winter onions to our scrambled eggs and pulled tender rhubarb shoots for pies. Soon there would be leaf lettuce, radishes, and green onions from the garden, topped with sweet and sour cream dressing. they would become tasty salads. The meat supply would be running low as spring approached, so whatever we had left was alternated with stewing hens. In summertime, since we had no refrigeration, we cooked only enough food for one meal. Excess vegetables were preserved in a variety of ways. Green beans and tomatoes were canned. Sweet corn was cut from the cob and spread on a white sheet to dry. Cabbage was shredded and put in stone jars with salt for sauerkraut. When fall came, we bought a few bushels of peaches and pears for canning. Baskets of grapes were bought for jelly. Potatoes, carrots, onions were dug up and stored in the cellar. Winter was soup season. A meaty bone boiled with vegetables made a tasty appetizer. Thicker, meatier stews were meals in themselves. Chicken noodle soup was a favorite, as were potato soup and navy bean soup with bits of ham or bacon. Tomato soup was a Depression specialty. Home canned tomatoes and milk were heated separately, and a little soda was added to the tomatoes to keep the milk from curdling when the two were combined. It had a unique flavor unmatched by any other tomato soup, and food preparation required more work then, but the cooks were creative. If they were out of an ingredient, they substituted another. Flour replaced cornstarch, honey or syrup took the place of sugar, and soda and baking powder were used interchangeably. These changes were rarely detected, and the food was just as delicious and filling. We might have felt poor during the Depression, but we ate like kings. At age 10, I didn't know we were poor. It seemed we had just as much as everybody else. We didn't eat much meat in those days. What we did eat was fried potatoes, and lots of them. One day, my mother decided we needed something a little different. She handed me a small knife and a paper sack. Go up to the telephone company and ask if you can pick the dandelions from their lawn, she told me. I came back with a whole sack full. Mother cooked the dandelions in bacon fat, and they were delicious. I was so proud to have made that contribution to our meal. Gracie Thomas, Flagstaff, Arizona. Okay, guys, that's all for this video. You stay safe, you stay positive, you keep prepping. And as always, fear less.